Pride family from Phoenix, Arizona was torn apart by a devastating tragedy that continues to haunt the community to this day. On Labor Day, typically a time for celebration, Valerie Pride and her two daughters experienced the last day of their lives. Valerie was only 24 years old on September 6, 1982. She had recently moved into a lovely new home with her cherished little girls, Shonita, who was 8, and Duana, who was 4. When she purchased the Spanish-style home on East Ardmore Street in Phoenix, Arizona, she could not have imagined it would become the site of their brutal murders. The main questions that are asked by residents who still reside in the neighborhood where the Pride family lived is, who was the heartless person that committed such a gruesome act? And why is the case still unsolved after 40 years? Let's take a deeper dive. Valerie Pride was born to James and Ada Latham. She was born and raised in Arizona. She had 6 siblings, 5 sisters and 1 brother. Valerie finished high school at South Mountain High School and later went to Arizona State University. She married James Vaughn, and they had 2 children together, daughters Shonita and Duana. However, the marriage didn't last and ended in 1981. Valerie was a determined and accomplished woman. She worked at the Palo Verde nuclear plant, becoming the first black female electrician in 1982. Life was good for Valerie and her girls. She had just bought a new car and a new house. The house stood as a spacious Spanish-style house in an affluent neighborhood in Phoenix. It appeared to be a pleasant neighborhood with sizable Spanish-style houses, all sharing a similar architectural style. Valerie was also finishing her last year in a 4-year apprenticeship program to become a licensed electrician. Valerie loved her daughters dearly, and her family would later express that her children meant everything to her and brought her immense pride and joy. Her 8-year-old daughter, Shonita, went to Sierra Vista grade school. It is believed that her youngest daughter, Duana, who was only 4 at the time, had not yet started school. It can be said that Valerie was dearly loved by her family. She was a dedicated mother and an outstanding individual who had gone the extra mile to ensure her daughters would have a wonderful life. On Monday, September 6, 1982, Valerie and her daughters marked their first Labor Day in their new home. Regrettably, it was not a joyous occasion. Early that afternoon, Valerie's boyfriend, Ben Daniels, received a phone call informing him that his 9-year-old daughter from a previous relationship had experienced an epileptic seizure while bathing and tragically drowned. He hurried to the hospital where she had been taken, only to find out that doctors couldn't save her life. Shortly before 9:30 p.m. that night, Valerie made a call to her brother. As she was talking with him, she heard a knock on her front door. Since Ben had not yet returned home from the hospital, Valerie informed her brother that she had to leave to check who was at the door. Her brother was unaware that it would be the final conversation he would ever have with his sister. Arriving home at around 10 p.m., Ben discovered the front door of the house wide open, despite the 109-degree temperature. Upon entering, he stepped straight into a nightmare. Valerie's daughters, 8-year-old Shontia and 4-year-old Duana, were huddled together in the living room, covered in blood. Someone had fatally stabbed them. Valerie was on the floor of the dining room and was also stabbed multiple times. It seemed like she had attempted to reach the back door but was attacked before she could get there. Ben struggled to comprehend the sight before him. His reaction was reduced to horrified screams. Upon hearing his cries, neighbors promptly called the police. Upon arriving at the scene, investigators from the Phoenix Police Department were horrified by the brutality of the triple murder. A detective found it necessary to step outside and take a moment away from the carnage. Speaking to a reporter, he exclaimed, "My God, it's terrible in there. They're stabbing all over the place." Shontia and Duana were discovered in their pajamas, indicating they were prepared for bed when the attack occurred. Detectives formed the theory that Valerie had been attacked almost immediately after she answered the knock at her front door. Following the crime, the likely scenario was that the killer had escaped through the back door. A bloody handprint on one of the wooden rails of the backyard fence suggested that the murderer had jumped over it. The crime left residents in shock. The neighborhood was usually very quiet. Valerie and her daughters had recently moved into their house a few weeks earlier. Described as a hardworking single mother devoted to her 2 daughters, Valerie's tragic end puzzled everyone in the community. No one could fathom why anyone would want to harm her and her children. The police faced difficulty finding a motive for the triple homicide, despite media reports stating that one of Valerie's daughters had been mutilated. There were no signs of sexual assault on any of the victims. No evidence indicated forced entry into the home, and nothing seemed to have been stolen. The killer or killers had only one intention that night: murder. The detectives were eager to identify the person behind the brutal attack, but they quickly ran out of leads. They interviewed all the residents of the South Phoenix neighborhood, but none reported seeing anything unusual on the night of the murder. The scorching heat added to the challenge, as most residents had been indoors with their air conditioners running when the attack took place. Those living closest to Valerie mentioned hearing some commotion around 9:45 p.m., but it wasn't significant enough to cause alarm. No one witnessed anyone entering or leaving Valerie's home. Despite putting forth their best efforts, the investigation came to a halt. After 6 months of no progress, homicide detectives increased their efforts. A few investigators returned to Valerie's neighborhood to conduct another sweep of the area. They re-interviewed neighbors and searched for any clues they might have overlooked during the initial investigation. In the hope of generating new leads, the Silent Witness Program and the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers Local 640 extended rewards for information that could lead to the arrest and conviction of the individual or individuals responsible for the Pride family's murder. While some tips trickled in, few leads were developed. While conversing with neighbors, detectives consistently encountered rumors suggesting that the murder of Valerie and her daughters was a form of revenge for the earlier accidental drowning death of Ben's daughter, 9-year-old Zeta Daniels. It remained unclear why anyone would hold Valerie responsible for the tragic incident, but the persistent rumors prompted investigators to follow up on them. Zeta resided in Phoenix with her mother, Gloria Freeman, in a house situated about a mile away from Valerie's new home. According to Gloria, she had been supervising Zeta during her bath, but had briefly stepped away. It was believed that Zeta experienced an epileptic seizure during this time. Upon Gloria's return to the bathroom, Zeta was found underwater. Despite being rushed to the hospital, doctors were unable to save her. Following an autopsy, Zeta's death was officially declared a tragic accident. The medical examiner concluded that she had drowned, citing that the condition of her body was consistent with an epileptic seizure. While it seemed improbable that an accidental death could be linked to a violent triple homicide, investigators appeared to consider it a potential possibility. On August 18, 1983, 14-year-old Kevin Atkins faced arrest outside Phoenix's Christown Mall as investigators suspected his involvement in the murders of Valerie, Shanita, and Dwana. Although he was released the following day, police emphasized that his release didn't rule him out as a suspect. The Maricopa County District Attorney's Office sought additional evidence before considering prosecution against Kevin. Detectives expressed confidence in their ability to gather the necessary evidence for filing charges. Investigators made it known that they were actively searching for at least 2 other individuals they suspected of being linked to the crime. They believed that, apart from Kevin Atkins, another juvenile and 1 or more adults had played a role in the murder of Valerie and her children. This act of violence was thought to be an act of revenge for the death of Zeta Daniels. It was revealed that Gloria Freeman was Kevin Atkins's aunt, and Zeta Daniels was his cousin. While detectives initially appeared confident in having probable cause to charge Kevin with the crime, it remained unclear if they possessed any physical evidence linking him or anyone else to the murders. Charges were never brought against him, although rumors persisted, hinting at the Zeta's family involvement in the murder. These allegations were never substantiated, and the case eventually went cold. Investigators suggested that the murders might have been connected to a burglary at the Pride House in August 1982. Valerie had returned home to find her waterbed mattress slashed and all her clothes thrown into the water. It was unclear if there were any suspects in the burglary, and no charges were filed. 2 years after the murder, a knife was discovered in Valerie's neighbor's backyard, resembling the believed murder weapon. Detectives hoped it might provide a lead but couldn't confirm its use in the crime after analysis. In 1988, Sergeant Mike Hobel of the Silent Witness Program appealed for information, bringing in tips but no new leads. Over the years, investigators pursued numerous leads, conducted thousands of interviews, and spoke with people across the country. However, no solid suspects emerged. In 2005, Detective Bob Brunansky took on the cold case, hoping to solve it after more than 2 decades. Despite his efforts and public appeals, no new leads surfaced. The crime remains unsolved after 4 decades. In June 2022, Valerie's sister, Vicki McDonald, expressed the family's ongoing quest for justice, still shocked by the brutality of the crime. Detective Dominic Rostenberg of the Phoenix Police Cold Case Unit is currently working on the case, using advanced technology to reanalyze evidence. Despite the challenges, he remains hopeful, acknowledging the need for public assistance in solving the case.